DT200 Assembly Pre-Ride Inspection and Starting Instructions. Once carton is removed from metal crate, locate and remove bolts to disassemble the crate.
Carefully lay out frame sections. Make sure not to pull on any of the cables when removing from the crate. Locate the owner's manual and the assembly instructions booklet. The toolkit, seat, footrests, safety net frame, safety net, frame hardware, footrest hardware, seat hardware, net support hardware, and zip ties. Frame assembly. Locate the frame hardware. This will include the 8mm by 35mm bolts, 8mm lock washers, and the 8mm acorn nuts. Adjust the frame so all cables are on top of the frame. Make sure they're not tangled. For ease of assembly, place 3-inch spacers under the back frame and also the front frame. Slide front and back frame sections together to line up mounting holes. Bolt the frame together using the 8mm bolt, 8mm lock washer, and also the 8mm acorn nut. Do not tighten any of the bolts until all 6 bolts are installed in the frame. Bolt the frame together using the 8mm bolts, 8mm lock washers, and the 8mm acorn nuts. Do not completely tighten the bolts until all 6 bolts are installed. Tighten with the 6mm Allen wrench provided. With a torque wrench, torque all bolts to 20 foot-pounds. Handlebar assembly. With the 6mm Allen head wrench, remove the 4 8mm handlebar mount bolts from steering assembly and remove the clamp. Lift handlebars in place and reinstall the 8mm bolts. Torque the bolts to 10 foot-pounds. Add engine oil. It's a good idea to add engine oil before the seat is installed. To add engine oil, remove the oil fill cap. Fill with 0.62 quarts of oil. This will fill the oil up to the brim of the hole. Use 10W30 engine oil. Safety net assembly. Hardware needed is 2 8mm by 30mm bolts and 8mm lock nuts. Install net support at attachment points on frame. Attach the net support using the 8mm by 35mm bolts and the 8mm lock nuts. Attach net to support by wrapping the webbing around frame and using the buckles located on the net. Zip tie cables. Zip tie all loose cables to the frame. Make sure none of the cables are pinched or kinked. Once the cables are zip tied, cut off the loose ends. Seat assembly. Hardware for the seat assembly includes 6mm by 12mm front seat bolts, 6mm by 20mm rear bolts, and 6mm rear lock nuts. Insert the front seat bolts. Do not fully tighten until the rear seat bolts are in place. Install the rear seat bolts and the rear lock nuts. Once all bolts are installed, tighten snug. Install footrests. Footrest hardware include 8mm by 20mm bolts and 8mm lock washers. Install the footrests and attach by using the 8mm by 20mm bolts and lock washers. Tighten bolts snug. Pre-ride inspection. Check the air pressure in the rear tires. The pressure should be 35 psi. Check the air pressure in the front tire. The air pressure should be 20 psi. Check the lug bolts on the rear wheels. Make sure they're tight. Also check the axle bolt on the front wheel, making sure it is tight. Continue to check all bolts and make sure that they are tight. Inspect the steering. Make sure there is no restriction of movement. Make sure the front and rear brakes are working properly. Inspect the hand throttle. The hand throttle should snap back to idle when released. Starting instructions. Fill engine with fresh, clean, unleaded gasoline. Check the oil level. If oil is needed, check the owner's manual for type and quantity. Warning: before starting the engine, make sure the operator has read and understands the owner's manual and all warning labels. The owner's manual and warning labels have important safety information. Always wear a helmet, eye protection, and protective riding gear. To start the engine, press the on-off switch on the handlebars to the on position. Place the fuel valve in the on position. Place the choke lever to the on position. Pull the recoil cord until the engine starts. Once the engine is started and warmed up, place the choke lever back to the off position. For questions regarding this video, please call Coleman Power Sports at 888-405-8725 or go to colemanpower.com.